Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this webinar on the Next Guides. What we plan to do is show you what's in the Next Guides, how to use them, and how they can be used as a resource for your schools. This is done by the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, and my name is Dwayne Gregg. I am with Gear Up, the director of Gear Up Tennessee.
And my name is Suzette Telly. I'm the statewide services coordinator for THEC, and I also work with Dwayne and Gear Up Tennessee.
I'm Mandy Pitts. I'm the Gear Up Site Coordinator at Fayetteville High School in Fayetteville, Tennessee.
And I'm Poppy Merriman, and I'm the Post-Secondary Services Coordinator for Anderson County Schools, and I also work with Gear Up Tennessee.
So the agenda for this webinar, first we want to talk a little bit about the history of the Next Guides, how they came about, how they came into place, and then for Gear Up Tennessee, kind of how they've changed for the last couple of years and what is next, what with the Next Guides, where we plan to go for the next couple of years. We want to spend a little bit of time on the content of the Senior Next Guides, what's in them, and then finally we want to talk a little bit about some best practices, how you can use these guides in your schools. We have two site coordinators with Gear Up that have used them for several years. They're going to talk about some of their experiences and what they found really works well in their schools and some things that you might want to consider. Currently in the state of Tennessee with the Next Guides for the class of 21-22, we have a sophomore guide, a junior guide, and a senior guide. What you'll find is as you look at the guides, they're similar in that they will contain a lot of college exploration information, career exploration, information about financial aid and things like that. But the content is going to be very different based upon the age and the grade level of those students. We have obviously put different colored covers on each one. So a lot of you in your schools, you may use each one for each student level. And that way you and your student can easily see which one that one is. A little bit about the Next Guides. I want to make sure that you can find them. So in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how we've distributed these and how we've made them available. But what I wanted you to know, if you don't have a physically printed Next Guide and in your school, it's not something that you all plan to print, know that you can go into College for TN website, go into Resources for Schools, and you will see the Next Guides. This year, you will see a 10th grade, an 11th grade, and a 12th grade Next Guide that you can download. You could print from the website. They're also something that are fillable that you could use online as well. So that's a great resource that any school in our state could use that way. You also see the gray 9th grade Next Guide that we plan to work on during this next year. So next year we will have Next Guides available for grades 9 through 12. So a little bit about the origins of the Next Guide. In the year 2017-2018, Gear Up Arizona created what they called the Launch Guide. Gear Up is a federally funded college access program from the U.S. Department of Education with Gear Up programs, both what they call state programs and partnership grants throughout the country. With Gear Up Arizona, they created a launch guide that is really geared toward Arizona, what their needs are, what their students, financial aid programs in their state, and that sort of thing. But at a national conference we attended, we learned about their launch guide, and we were really impressed. So in the state of Tennessee, we've had a lot of resources, college-going types of resources, whether it's about college applications or financial aid or scholarships and things, but it's never been in one place. So this was an opportunity. That's what we liked about this. It was one guide that included all of this information that students could use. We could see parents using it, educators, counselors, and everything in one booklet. So we loved their guide and immediately talked to them about ways that we might be able to share and borrow and use some of their information and then kind of make it our own for the state of Tennessee. The next thing that they did, and then I'll talk about how ours has changed, is they also then created what they called their Discover Guide. And they still, if you go to their website with Gear Up Arizona, you will see they still have a launch guide and they changed it and made it better every single year. They also then created a Discover Guide. The Discover Guide is for students that are in middle school in the state of Arizona that are doing a lot more of that kind of exploration types of things about careers and colleges and just trying to figure out what's out there. So after spending about a year going through their guide, we had several people in the state of Tennessee that really were trying to implement and do their own thing with the launch guide. And we realized it just made a lot more sense, instead of every high school creating their own type of guide, that we would create something at the state level that would meet all of the needs across the state at different schools. So the first thing we did in 2019, 2020 was creating that first senior guide. With the Gear Up Tennessee program, we have a model to where we serve a cohort group of students, and then each year we serve seniors in our high schools that we serve. So for that reason, the first guide the next year was for sophomores. So each year we serve seniors. So starting in 20 and 21, we added a sophomore next guide. And then in this current year, that cohort group has moved up into their junior year in school. So now we have a sophomore, junior, and senior guide. So what we have also done, in addition to adding new guides, is each year we've also updated the other guides that we've had as well. So then the question is, what's going to be next? The first one I've already mentioned is that next year that we plan to have a guide for freshmen. Even though our cohort with Gear Up next year will be in their senior year, we still see that there's a need to have a guide for every single year in high school. So we're going to go back and create one of those with Gear Up funding. And then we're also going to do something with middle school. At this point, we don't know exactly what that may be, but the needs are great for students to start this process early. So we will also do something. I don't know if it'll look like the Discover Guide or something different. The last thing that's related to this we're going to do is we're going to put together a series of webinars that you'll find on the College for TN site that will go along with the different sections of the next guide. Briefly wanted to mention how I can get my hands on the next guide. So there's some schools, if you're a Gear Up Tennessee school, if you're an Advise Tennessee school, you have printed next guides that have been available for you the last couple of years, and that will continue. What we've also done this year is, with every school that is a distressed county, a school system in a distressed county, we offered their high school that we would use Gear Up funds to print and then distribute and send to them the printed next guides. The other thing, and we also, what we did this year is send an email to principals and school counselors to let them know that if they wanted to basically kind of get the rate that we have done for the state of Tennessee that we contracted, because instead of just printing 100 next guides or 200 next guides for your high school, they're able to kind of piggyback on the rate that the state of Tennessee was able to get when we're printing thousands of next guides. So that was an opportunity this past year that I assume that we will continue to do in the next years. And then the final thing is what I mentioned before, that it's something that you could just print off locally at your own high school. It's something that you can print off locally at a print shop that you have. Or if you just want to have, or if it's, every teacher in your school just wants to have students, they're using a lot of one-on-one technology and laptops, just open them up and use them online, then you can go to College for TN and look at the next guides that way as well. I believe next we will have Suzette Telly that's going to start to talk about the senior guide and some of the content in it.
Thank you, Dwight. Next, we wanted to talk about what's actually in the next guide and how do we describe the next guide. So when we're asked to put it in print, we say the senior next guide is a Tennessee-specific college and career handbook, which contains information and activities for students as they decide what their next step will be after high school: university, community college, TCAT, military, apprenticeships, or entering the workforce. And as we say here, seniors will find everything from financing their college education to writing a resume and everything in between. They'll also find helpful tools for tracking the status of college applications, scholarship applications, job applications. We have all the trackers. And also pages for recording information that's important and private that they'll need to access regularly throughout the year. So we always encourage them to keep that private information private. And if they're going to write personal information in the guide, to keep it kind of close to the vest. So here to kind of tell you what's in the guide, we've broken out the table of contents. So section 1 is staying on track. So staying on track again with the trackers and picking a track, staying on that track. We've got more information this year about Tennessee colleges and universities. We've got their addresses, their seed codes, average ACTs, lots of good information. We've got a section on what is the best fit for me. Then we start into pathways. So if you're going to go to university, this section is for you. Community college, TCAT, military enlistment, and workforce. So again, tracking, pick a track, stay on that track. Section 2 is college applications. So again, with the personal information, we ask them to record that personal information, but keep it private. There's family information and other personal information, anything that they might need to fill out a college application. There's, as I mentioned before, a tracker for college applications, so they'll know what schools they've applied to and when, and then they can track their progress. There's information on transferring from a community college to a university and picking your transfer pathway. Here's a pullout from the workforce section. So if a student tells you that they want to get a job right after high school rather than go to college, we give them some concrete steps to follow. So they're not just saying, oh, I want to get a job. Okay, so you have a whole year. How do you prepare to go into that job and land a good job after you graduate? So we ask them, like, what are 3 career interest areas that you might have? And then we give them concrete steps to follow throughout the year so that they'll be prepared to go into that career after graduation. Section 3 is the FAFSA and financial aid. So of course we start with what is financial aid. Then we talk about Tennessee-specific financial aid, applying to the Tennessee Promise. Then we go into federal student aid and kind of the differences between Tennessee and federal student aid. There's pre-FAFSA information, everything they need to gather before they sit down to actually fill out the FAFSA. And then the FAFSA steps. Now, I like the way we've broken it out. It's very simple to follow. Step 1 is the FSA ID. Step 2 is filing the FAFSA. Step 3 is review my student aid report. And I guess if there were a step 4, it would be making corrections on your FAFSA, which is the next step. There's also financial aid award letters, what that letter might look like, and what you need to do after you receive your financial aid award. Section 4 is scholarships. So we start with the what, where, and how scholarships, writing a personal statement, writing a standout essay, also information on proofreading and revising your essay, letters of recommendation, and a recommendation request form, and then another tracker, the scholarship application tracker. So they'll know what scholarships they've applied to and they can track their progress. Here's another pullout. This one is from the FSA ID section. So we give them the website they need to go to, all the information they're going to need to record, and then they can even write in their challenge questions and the answers because they tend to forget those. But again, keeping that private information private. Section 5 is pursuing a future in the military. So we've tried to flesh this section out more this year. So we've got more general information about military enlistment. New this year, we've got applying to America's service academies and also ROTC programs by branch of service. Section 6 is joining the workforce. So when entering the workforce is your first step, this is what you do to take that first step. There's resume and job application information, how to create a resume and a sample resume, how to create a cover letter and a sample cover letter. And then finally, section 7 is what's next. So we give them a summer college checklist. So it'll take them all the way from high school graduation to the fall when they hopefully enroll in college and everything they need to do in between to make that transition. And then finally, glossary of terms. As you know, there are a lot of terms that just go with higher education, and students don't always know what those terms mean. So we have a really easy to understand glossary of terms, and so hopefully they'll be prepared when they hear those terms once they go to college. Here again is a pullout. This one is from the military section. So you can see it at the top, it says action steps to enlist in the military service. They can put in the date completed for each of those steps. Also, as that cut scores for enlistment, I think are very helpful. So they can see for the branch of service what that cut score was in 2020 and see how their scores stack up.
Thank you, Suzette. So the next guides are made to where if a student were to do everything that's in the next guide from cover to cover, they would be ready for college. But we know the reality is that our students are not going to be the ones necessarily that if you just give them the book, they're going to do all those things and they're going to be prepared. So we wanted to share a couple of best practices, the things that we've learned of how to utilize these books and how to utilize them best with your students and different types of students at your school. Otherwise, the next guide by itself is not going to make the difference. It's going to be how you use it and who uses it and that sort of thing, who you use it with in your school that will make a difference. The first thing that you want to think about, again, this will be whether or not these are going to be printed next guides. Are these going to be some that you get from the state? Are these things you're going to reprint locally? Are you going to be using them online or something like that? But if you look at the first bullet, Think about how these next guides are going to be stored. Think about how they're going to be used, who's going to use them, where you're going to use them, when you're going to distribute them. If they are printed guides, are you going to have a meeting with all of your students at one time to explain to them kind of the purpose of the guide and the content and go through that? Is that something that you would do, but you might go from classroom to classroom doing that? Also think about whether or not these are something that you want to keep at your school, or have students that would have the option of keeping these at the school instead of taking them home. There's pros and cons to doing that. You want them to take them home and do things with them at night and with their parents and things. You want them to be able to bring them from class to class and be able to use them. We also know that sometimes when students bring things home, that means they may not bring them back. So it's just something for you to think about with your school, what would be best. The next part of it is, these guides are not going to work best if it's just a school counselor or just a college access professional, that they're the only one at your school trying to use the next guides. We know our teachers are really important and are really busy. So when you think about how you can incorporate teachers into their using of the next guides, go through the different sections. So if you're thinking about your FAFSA and your scholarship sections, look at your economics and personal finance teachers. Again, for scholarships as well as college application essays, you might want to think about your English or journalism or writing teachers and how they could assist students with those types of things. I found that with CTE teachers, they are excellent with doing a lot of the career exploration pieces, because that's part of what they do with their students already. You probably have ACT prep courses at your school. There's an ACT prep section of this guide. So think about what teachers are those that are already engaged in this work. So we're not really giving them something else to do, but we're giving them a tool that they can do some of those things that they already do. The other thing I would think about is teachers are going to be just the same way as students. Don't just give the guide to a teacher and say, here, you can use this. Specifically ask if you can spend 15 minutes with them and look at pages 15 through 20 or 17 through 22, and then go through those sections that you think would really apply to some things that they might be able to use in their classroom. Give them chance to look through it and that opportunity to figure out how they can use it with their curriculum and their requirements and the time that they have with their students and what students that they're serving. Again, we're focusing primarily on the senior guide here, but again, know that online you also have a sophomore and a junior guide as well that some of those teachers could use. Everything that you're going to do at your school related to financial aid, whether it's Tennessee Promise, completing the FAFSA, scholarship applications, anything. If you have family nights to where you have parents and families come in and listen to someone from a TSAC outreach specialist talk about financial aid, all of those are opportunities for students to have the next guide, record their passwords when they're doing those sorts of things. If you're having a FAFSA workshop during the day when they're completing their Tennessee Promise registration, use the next guide for those things and actually point out the places in the guide where they'll put in their usernames and passwords and things like that. The more times when you can kind of re-emphasize the same things, a lot of these times with the workshops, a workshop may go on for 30 or 45 minutes or an hour. And so they're not having to take notes, or parents and families are not having to take notes on those things. You can emphasize that a lot of that same information as far as dates and deadlines and amounts of money, they'll find right there in the next guide. The next thing is, so in addition to those teachers that are teaching classes, look for additional opportunities at your schools that you can use the next guide, or someone can use the next guide for the things they're doing. I know this is kind of different at each high school, what those opportunities look like. It could be RTI, it could be advisory times, it could be homerooms, it could be senior meetings. Again, every high school has kind of different things in the way they're set up. And this may be something that happens every single day. It may be something that happens every week. In some of the cases, like a senior meeting, it may be something that happens once a month. But look at what those opportunities are, then find the person or the individuals that are responsible for those things, get those next guide to them. And then going back to that first slide that we looked at here, to spend some time training those individuals for what you think that they could do with that time. A lot of times you'll find that those individuals are looking for content, or they're looking for curriculum that they can use during that time. And this will just fit in really well with what their needs are and with the students they serve. Again, thinking about the parents and family, this is an excellent guide. So what we love to see happen a lot of times, that if a college access professional or a school counselor or someone is using the next guide, a teacher is using the next guide during the day, if that student can then bring their next guide home that night and start reviewing some of those things with their parents. So when they're talking about going online and doing a career exploration piece or a college search or something like that. Hopefully that kind of brings about a conversation that they can have with their family about what they're doing and what they want to do and where they see themselves in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. This is a guide, again, when you're having with your seniors, when you're having their FAFSA nights, your Tennessee Promise events, and parents or families are there, let them be a part of the next guide process. So as a family, they see where their student is going to be going and how they're going to be paying for it and what kind of test scores they need to have and things like that. The next thing, again, this is just about collaboration. It's about, so it's not 1 or 2 people that are leading this charge at your school, but so many people are working kind of in the same way, rowing the same boat in the same direction. So if you have a lot of our schools in the state of Tennessee are blessed to have college access professionals that are there to support a lot of the things that are happening with college access, in addition to school counselors, whether it's Talent Search or Upward Bound or AIRS or Tennessee Achieves or NISWANGR or so many other things that we have that may be localized just to a certain school or a certain community, but not on a state level. Make sure those individuals also get copies of the next guides and that they're a part of the conversation of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. Again, so everybody's on the same page, and that if you have this individual, school counselors and teachers from different areas, students are going to be hit multiple times over a period of a week and a semester or a month, talking about the next guide and some of these same things. The last thing that I would mention is look at your equity gaps from your schools. What we have in a lot of situations, some of our schools, that we have groups of students that are not going to college at the same rate as other students, whether that's based upon race or ethnicity, our first generation students, socioeconomic status, or students with disabilities. So how can we use the guides with those particular students so that we're not using the guides in the same way with every single student? We're using them differently with some students. We're using them multiple times with some students. So as an example, with our socioeconomic status, or our first generation students, so with our students that are Pell eligible, you may spend more time with those students talking about the FAFSA and the financial aid section as opposed to another student. With your students with disability, they may be students that feel like that college is really not for them, that's not an option. We have a new section with the College for TN, so students can look in the College for TN and see that there are certain schools that will provide resources and supports and things like that that they can go to and they can qualify and finish and get a degree. Same thing with race and ethnicity. If you have groups of students at your school that are just not being served as well, or for one reason or another, they have not seen themselves as college going, figure out how you can use the guide. Maybe it's career exploration pieces or something, but how you can use the guide. Maybe it's the college exploration pieces, where you can kind of go in and find certain colleges like HBCUs or something for some of our minority students, but how you can use the next guide to focus on those students going to college and removing those gaps and those barriers that we have in some of our schools. I think next, Mandy Pitts from Fayetteville High School is going to speak about some of her best practices. And I would just add, Mandy was one of those first people that came back from the conference and said, this is something in the state of Tennessee we need, and we could use this. So thank you, Mandy.
Thanks, Dwayne. Next guides, they're laid out in such a logical way that it makes it real easy to go through the guides kind of tab by tab with my students. And I tend to do this mostly in kind of a full classroom workshop forum with my students. For example, in August, early August, the first one that I tend to go through is the staying on track section, that very first section with them. I find that's a good way to really go through the overview of all the different paths that are available to students, whether they are planning on going into four-year university, community college, the workforce, military, that really kind of goes through an overview for them and gives them a timeline, of all the different tasks that they're going to need to get through for the year. Also, it provides them with an introduction to collegefortn.org, for those students that may not necessarily have an idea of what they want to do after they graduate. They can go on that website, they can explore different careers, or those students that think they want to go to college, but they're not sure which one, they can explore all the different colleges, that may be a good fit or good match for them as well. Later in either late August, early September, we tend to go through the college application section to let them know of all the different information they're going to need for college applications, kind of how that process looks. Next Guide is a great resource for that as well. And it also matches up great with College Application Month. And then, of course, in late September, we go through that third tab, which is all about financial aid. And that really kind of brings home how important it is to get that FAFSA done. And that's also a great time to use that next guide to get those FSA IDs done, kind of before that October 1st FAFSA kicks in. I also try to make it the student's go-to guide. I want to make sure that not only do seniors have their next guide, but I try to add some additional things as well. So that way, this is, almost like the senior Bible, so they have all the information that they need for senior year. They have their transcripts. They have the national ACT dates. They have national scholarship websites that they can apply to. They have the TSAC flyers with all of the Tennessee aid information on there. They have the Tennessee Promise steps and the deadlines for that, as well as all the information on our school that's required for college applications, whether it's email addresses, the school code, the address, all of that kind of stuff on there. I want to make sure that seniors realize, that how to look for the information, how to find the information before just kind of running to me every time, kind of make them a little bit more responsible. Also, and I know that this was mentioned before, to make sure that teachers have copies. I think that's always a great best practice. A lot of things have to get done, especially senior year, and putting it kind of on one person. We don't always have the time, and when everyone at school is kind of involved, then that makes it better for everyone. Then everyone kind of takes responsibility for that. Our English teachers are real great about, working on resume writing with the students, working on those personal statements, working on those college essays. The ACT prep teacher at my school, he's great. Every Wednesday he does like a college Wednesday. Instead of drilling down on the ACT prep things, he does a lot of college kind of activities with the students. They just did like virtual college visits this past Wednesday, and the kids were telling me about that. So, in personal finance and math, of course, they should, I guess, be looking at financial aid options, different salaries of careers, college costs, learning how to compare those, so just anyone at your school, that you can kind of get to help out with the different sections, then I think they're going to be great resources for you. And of course, add a link on the school website. Parents and students, they should be able to access the next guide at any time. You're always going to have those students that you give a next guide to, and within a week, they may have lost it, or a parent may call you, and ask about the next guide, and you're like, well, I gave it to so-and-so, but, you can always access it at any time, through their school website. And a lot of times they're very grateful for that kind of information. Okay, up next is Hoppy from Anderson County Schools.
Love Next Guides. And I'm going to tell you why I love Next Guides, because for the very reason that Mandy said, creating that independence, creating that initiative where a student drives their own future. And I think in the world that we're living in right now with COVID, one of the most important things is for kids to feel like they have control. So what's so great about the Next Guide is that it is a resource that they can go to, whether it's online or they physically have a Next Guide in their hand, and they can use that as their roadmap for what they want to do next. So I think the first thing you have to do is decide where and how you're going to use your Next Guides. Are you going to use them in selected classes? Are you going to use them for a parent college knowledge event? Tonight, we have a financial aid meeting, and everyone gets a gift if they come to the meeting. Their gift is their Next Guide. These are great incentives. Kids get excited about them. You play them up before you have your event, and everyone shows up ready to get their hands on this Next Guide and ready to go through it and learn about it and use it as a tool. You also can use it in one-on-one counseling sessions. It is a great place for a student to document information. When I'm using them in one-on-one counseling sessions, I will use a sticky note and create a tab that has a deadline for a student to complete a task and bring it back to me. So when your Next Guides arrive, if you physically order Next Guides, you're going to get a bunch of boxes and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I got all these boxes. I'm overwhelmed. What do I do with this? So I figured out I need to make sure everybody has a Next Guide. So I printed mailing labels, and this was particularly useful with everything we've been through with COVID because teachers can come and check the Next Guides out, pull the ones that are from their class. If it's my ACT teacher, if it's my personal finance teacher, an English teacher, they come and we help them pull the guides to use in class, and then they bring them back. So if another teacher wants to use them up to a certain point in the year, once we do FAFSA, our students are going to take those home. My better students, my more responsible students, are going to take them home from the very beginning because they're doing 4-year applications. But we do store a lot of our Next Guides in the shipping boxes after we pull them out and put mailing labels on there. That is particularly helpful during things like COVID or when you have kids on homebound, because that student's Next Guide that's stuck in the box that hasn't been used, you pull it out, you've got the address right on there, drop it in an envelope, call that student and say, hey, I just mailed you something really awesome. I want you to look at it, and I'm going to call you again next Thursday so we can talk about the things in this book. So it allows you to serve students that maybe are in your online programs or not in your building. We sometimes organize the guides by class rosters for use in specific classes. Our counselors also will sort the guides by counselor group when they get ready to have their senior information meetings and take them into their offices and use them there. So this book keeps appearing in the lives of my students for the first 2 months of school. That way they know what an important piece it is for them. The boxes that the Next Guides come in, when you empty them, you actually can stand them top to bottom in there so it becomes like a little filing system. I highly encourage you to do that so that you can use them over and over in their classes. Now, some of my students will look at me and say, Ms. Merriman, can I leave this in your room? If I take it home, it'll be lost, or we move a lot, or even sometimes, Ms. Merriman, we're homeless right now. So we give them a special box to store their Next Guide in, and it is their safe place. It's their safekeeping place. It's exciting at the end of the year to see those students come in and pick up their Next Guides, and we look through to see if we need to add anything. They've come in and out all during the year. They've gotten that mentoring, and they've gotten that professional friendship that they need to guide them through this process. So I would encourage you to keep your shipping boxes and use them for that. In section 4, we always like to have scholarship workshops. And so we go to scholarship websites and we have the students create accounts on websites like FastWeb. There they will record their username and their password in section 4 for financial aid and scholarships. And we make them apply for at least one scholarship and record the tracking information. There's a difference in handing a student a tool and teaching a student how to use a tool. So I would encourage you to use your Next Guide in this way to try to help your students get additional scholarships and also shows them that process. There is so much money out there right now for students at universities and in the private sector that we want to make sure that our students have access to as many dollars as they can get. So hopefully this will be a great way for you to use your Next Guide.
Thank you, Hoppy. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions from this webinar, please feel free to follow up. You see Suzette's email as well as mine, so please email us if you have any questions. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.